Alright, so the project we got going on today, we're going to swap out this differential for the one in the turbo manual Camaro right now. This is a 373 diff out of a manual Camaro SS. And one way you can tell the gear ratio, because it's kind of conflicting with how GM does it, they just give you this sticker and you got to type it in their parts warehouse and decode it. But another way is when you get your diff, you can mark them with tape, and every time this spins once, this should spin 3 3/4 times. So we're going to do, there's 1, 2, 3, and now we're going to go 3/4. And our tape's back up at the top, so we know that this is a good 373 diff. Only special tools we're going to need for this is going to be our slide hammer, which we rented off of Advance. It's like $185. And just some basic parts in order to get these hubs and flanges off, disconnect the drive shaft, and then there's just 3 main bolts here that hold this unit into the car. So let's get started. So we got a little bit of work started on the car. We're up under here disconnecting the axles, and I got this side all disconnected, and it is a E12 torque socket to take those bolts out. They're not too terrible to get out, but they are thread locked underneath here, and they do take a significant amount of effort to come out, but nothing a 3/8 ratchet with a small extension can't handle. I am noting a lot of thread locker on these, so I'm going to have to be very generous during the reassembly process. Now, since this one's already out, you'll notice, so there's a good bit of slack. You don't have to disconnect any of the rest of the axle shaft in order to get it to come out. So I'm just going to get a pry bar, get in between this lip here, and pry that sucker out, and then the axle shafts will be free. Then the only other thing we really need to do is disconnect the 3 drive shaft bolts here. I'm going to figure out what that size is here when I start cracking them loose. The next step we're working on is disconnecting the drive shaft from the flange of the rear differential. These are 18mm 6 points each side. It is not threaded on the inside here, and I recommend getting a big old cheater bar on this, because you're going to have a wrench on each side, because the compression of the engine is not enough to hold this still while you're trying to crack this loose, because these are Loctited together. But these 3 18mm need to come out. Drive shaft can now just slop, and then we should only have 3 more bolts on the diff, and she should come right out. Home stretch for removing the old diff. So we have 2 front bolts right here, and then 1 up here. These are both 18mm on each side. And then we got the big one come up here along the back of the differential. This is a 24, and that one's really tight. So now that they're loose, I'm gonna take my jack here and put it up under this bottom part of the diff, start cracking them loose, and see if I could drop it. Alright, so 3 hours later, I finally got it out. Oh my gosh, this thing was a pain in the butt. Couple lessons learned. The drive shaft has to be at a very linear angle in order to make sure that this comes out without issues. Also, the rubber bushing that mates this flange to the drive shaft, the collars for the rubber bushing were absolutely rusted in here and had to be pounded out before this would come out. Other than that, once there's no resistance on it, this comes out pretty easy. So next thing I got to do, I got to swap this over, because this is broken on my new diff. There's no cap on it, it's just a open hole. So anyway, I want to rip that off, and then this flange has to get changed with these flanges, because they're different bolt patterns. And just by lining them up with these little brackets here that come with the differential that's coming off my car, you can see they look close, like they will fit, but they are like just a couple mil off. So these need to get changed over onto the new diff, and then it's time for reinstallation. So it's the next morning. I didn't make my goal of getting this all done in one day like I wanted to, but if I were to take this apart again, just some of the things that I learned is going to make this job a lot easier, and I would probably make my goal of getting it done in a day. But I guess because of all the salt up here, things don't come apart as easy as you'd hope, especially with a car that's only 4 years old. But I think we left off where I was disconnecting the drive shaft, where you got these 3 bolts here holding that on, and then it just slides in and out of this inner race. What I had an issue with is if you look on the edge up here, you can see there's like a 2 to 3 millimeter protrusion from this rubber cush dampener, and that that metal collar in there was rusted onto my drive shaft, so I had to pound a bunch of screwdrivers in on the sides and wedge it up and off the drive shaft. But once that came free, the diff just came right out the bottom. So where we're at now is removing the stock flanges off of this so we could put onto that differential. So you can see I already got these ones off, and they do not come off easy. I'm going to get the other differential prepped, and I'll show you the process on how to remove those without a puller. Okay, so what we got here, I wanted to do this a couple times to make sure that it worked before I showed you guys how I got these off, but I just took a couple of these grade 8 bolts and I ran them through, and they're undersized, so they can slide in and out of these holes. And what I'm trying to do is make a smaller gap here so I get my pry bars in there and pound them in and wedge these off. Now I tried a slide hammer. Now the slide hammer I have, it is not the right size, so I had to improvise, and Matt, he gave me this idea from online, and this works pretty good. So we got our bolt running there, and then we're going to take, I just got this big 18-inch pry bar, and we're just going to take this and pound this into here. And whenever that starts taking up the tension, you can actually keep pounding away, or you can pry the hub off. And yes, it does take a significant amount of effort, but you put 2 bolts 180 of each other, and you pound your pry bars in there, and either just keep pounding them or just start prying whenever they get tight. Now whenever you get them in there, just be careful, because see, you want to get them, let's see if I get a good angle, you want to get it so it's not on the inner lip. You got to move it outbound so it's sitting right there on that seal, or the outside of that flange seal. Because if you get it in too far, the bar is actually prohibiting the flange from coming off. So, a little tricky, but then you don't have to spend $185 renting that slide hammer that ain't gonna work. Alright, let's get these off. So this is a neat opportunity to show you the difference in the flange sizes and to why they need swapped over. If you look, they are pretty darn close. But if you could see, the SS flange is about 1/4 of an inch bigger, and the holes are just slightly off. Now if you wanted to, you could leave these SS flanges in and put SS axle shafts in your car. Now my diff didn't come with the SS axle shafts, but the manual 6 Camaros, they already come with the thicker axle shafts in, so I don't really need to do that. So I'd rather just swap over my stock flanges for the SS ones into the new diff, and save myself a little bit of time and money by not having to take the old axle shafts out. So this is interesting. I figured I'd show you what you're trying to break it loose from while I got it all apart. This little clip on the end there that rides inside that race, that's what you're trying to get this to recess slightly so you can pop it out, and that's what holds this flange in place. Now all you do is just take your old flange, stick it inside here, and I was able to just push the other one in by hand. There we go. There it is. Old flanges are installed in the new diff. Let's crack the bolts loose for some fluid additions, and it's time to put it in the car. Alright, so we ran into a little bit of a stumbling block while trying to figure out how to plug these two ports, because on some of these that you get, they don't have these ports. And what these are for is an oil cooler for the SS's. I do not have the oil cooler. What they come with is these little yellow shipping plugs, and they just kind of like pop inside there. Now, these just thread inside here, and do not take them out both at one time, because this is actually held flush, this whole mounting block here, up against the inside of this differential, and it falls down inside. It is a pain in the butt trying to get back out. So these need plugged, because we're not hooking up an oil cooler for the rear diff. So what we came up with a solution. We tried to use these NPT plugs, which is very close to the size, but it is not. It was cross-threading in. This is a 1/2-inch NPT plug. Could not get this to work. However, a better solution is we took a piece of fuel line, ran it up tight on the inside of this, and then we just take a bolt and run it down on the inside here, and this will push it'll push the sidewalls of that fuel line up against the inside of this mount for a permanent plug fix. So I really wanted to do this fluid change while this is out of the car, because it's a lot easier to get to, and plus I could show you guys your drain holes here. You just take your 3/8 drive socket with an extension and just put a nice breaker bar on there. They'll come right out. Now, this must have been built on a Friday night, because whoever built this car, they just sent all these bolts. I don't know if they used an air tool or what, but okay, well, that's a magnetic drain plug-in. That's kind of neat. All these bolts are really tight, and I had to use a breaker bar to get the two fill plugs off. But this is the drain, this is the fill. In order to fill it up, you just take this top one out, put the bottom one back in, fill it to the top. Now the fluids that we have here, because this is a limited slip rear differential, I just picked the Mobile. I use the AC Delco, and it didn't really do much. So I got the synthetic gear lubricant with the friction modifier added. Now, I used the AC Delco stuff, and I still had to use the friction modifier. So now, if you do put your diff back together, and you use the right fluids, and your diff still groans, well then I would start adding this a quarter tube at a time. When I used the AC Delco fluid, I had to use about 3/4 of this tube before it quieted my diff up. And even then, it was still a little creaky for about a couple weeks until I guess everything settled in. But just in case, I got 2 extra tubes here, and I'm going to pre-fill with the last quarter tube of this in anticipation of having to add more. Alright, so let's fill her up. Alright guys, let's climb under the car one more time. I'm a little guilty of not keeping up with the videos, because it's been a day now, and I just needed to get my car back together, so I figured I'll show you guys some tips that I used while trying to put it back in, because it was a little bit of a bear. And let's get some light here. Definitely doing this one-handed is extremely, extremely difficult. But what I found works best is you want to put your diff in. Come straight in. You want to have the nose of the diff tilted up, and what works best is try to get it into the drive shaft first. Also, I took one of the side flanges back off. That way you have more room to get up in between these two pipes, because the distance in between these, when the 2 flanges are on, it will not fit. So you take one of the flanges off to get it to go back up and in. Makes it a lot easier. Also, you're going to probably want to tilt it at a slight angle. I tilted mine about 30 to 40 degrees clockwise, nose up and in. And once you get the drive shaft bolts bolted up here up front, they'll hang on there, no problem. And once that gets lined up, go with your ears next. There we go. And then you can get your 18mm bolts in here on each ear. And then last but not least, the final 24mm bolt head up here. And of course that just passes right back through here. When the diff is tilted up and you're trying to get it up in, I found out that if I just screwed this bolt into the back of the diff, it gives you a lot of control. So it makes it easier to get it positioned to where you need, because it is an awkward it is an awkward spot to work. But then, of course, once that's done, the last thing you really need to worry about is your axle flange bolts here. And I kept the car out of gear, jacked it up by the diff, and then you can spin the tires to get these axles lined up with the new diff. And they are very precise as to how they line up. So that is another thing to note, but make sure to use a lot of RTV in order to get that in. Also, I need to take it apart one more time. I need to take the drain plug out here and add some more friction modifier. I noticed when I was going to work this morning, when I was doing some turns, I was getting a light groan out of it. I used half a tube, and I'm going to dump in the rest of it. Now, I did use the Mobil 1 gear diff oil with the limited slip additive in it, but apparently these clutch packs, they need a little bit more than, I guess, you know, what you normally see out there on the road. Other than that, just threw a quick addition onto HP tuners to recalibrate for my 373 gears, because I noticed that my speedometer is about 10 to 15 miles per hour off. But that's the last step. She's all done and ready to go. So I hope this video really helps some people out, and some of the tips and tricks that I've used to get it all on and together, it would have made it a lot easier, and I could have got it done in an afternoon instead of spending 2 days on it. So, all right, have a good one, guys. Thanks for watching.